Hello everyone, this is Cindy from Myalism Films, and these are the 5 mistakes I've made as a mobile filmmaker. Now I thought this could be a fun idea to do, just share some of the mistakes that I've done and some of the lessons that I've learned from those mistakes. Very much a beginner smartphone filmmaker, and if this in some shape or form helps some of you out there that are just starting out, then I'd be super happy. So these are not like the end of the world type of mistakes. We all make mistakes as we learn and as we go along. So yeah, I'm just sharing this through my own experience. Mistake number 1, working with the gimbal and the monopod in combination. Now I've worked with the gimbal and the monopod combination before, but more in terms of slow, smooth panning shots. Like you see here in our smartphone short, the letter in the beginning. It's a pretty straightforward shot. It's just a pan from top to bottom and then a pull back as you just walk backwards and keep Nikki in my frame. But that's pretty much it. Now the delivery is a whole other story. Now running with the gimbal and the monopod is not quite the same as walking or tracking. By the way, the delivery is up on the channel. It's our latest smartphone short. It's very sci-fi themed. So go check it out, and if you like it, leave a like, leave a comment, and maybe hit that subscribe button. Now, running with the gimbal. What I did here, if you watch the shot, is I put my entire body weight down on each step that I took while running, and that transferred through the monopod up to the gimbal and to the phone and resulted in a very shaky footage. If the one in the delivery doesn't convince you enough, just check this out. All of them looked like this. The one that ended up in the delivery, I think, is the cleanest one. So this is one of the reasons why you have to practice with your gear any chance that you get. Even if it's not for something that you plan on putting up online or on YouTube, just practice with the gear, get to know it, get to feel comfortable with it. I did the mistake here of not actually exploring how to run with the gimbal, and I thought that it's going to be quite the same as just walking with the gimbal, but it wasn't. I could have easily changed the angle, lowered it a bit, or more wisely track closer at head level or just a little bit overhead. Changing the angle is a decision that I had to make whilst filming, and I didn't. And I think that's my prime mistake. I was so dedicated to this high angle, to this distance, to the look, and I felt that this is what the narrative needed. But that's not always the case. That's easily changed. I tried to keep Nikki within frame, but I kept running ahead of him over and over again, and I even sprinted on top of that, and I had like a whole lot of weight on me. I had the backpack on me with the tripod in it, and I was a lot heavier in my steps than you would want to be while filming a scene like this. But there's one other thing. If you want to keep tabs on high angle shots like this, and especially if you use Filmic Pro, you will need Filmic Remote. You'll need a second device to attach to your monopod and then connect to your main device. So the secondary one is going to serve as a monitor. Cassius Rainer at Go Film It has a fantastic tutorial on how to use Filmic Remote. I think you learned quite a lot by watching that video, so do yourself a favor and go and check it out. I'll leave a link in the description below. Alright, mistake number 2, no ND filter. I think maybe I should have bought an ND filter earlier on, but I didn't, and so I do consider this a mistake. And that's why if you watch the letter or one of our earlier smartphone shorts, Clouds, you'll be able to see quite a bit of noise and artifacts in some of the scenes. What an ND filter does is reduce the amount of light that comes through your camera lens. It reduces it in f-stops, so you can have an ND4, ND8, ND16, ND64, and so on. The ND makes it possible to keep your ISO as low as possible. You're not going to have an overexposed image. So you can see why ND filters are actually quite helpful, especially when you're filming outside in very harsh and bright daylight. But maybe you don't have the budget for an ND filter right now. Maybe you don't plan on getting one. Maybe you think they're kind of obsolete. You have a plan B, and that's to use the freest light source to all of us, the sun. You can take advantage of our beautiful sun during its 2 golden hours, an hour after sunrise and an hour before sunset. I prefer the sunset golden hour. I think it looks a little bit more beautiful. But if you're like me and sometimes you film in bright daylight, then you'll need an ND filter. For me, the prime use of the ND filter would have come in handy with the letter. It was filmed on a very bright day. It was a very sunny, very warm day, and with this film it places with little to no shadows at all. So if I had set ISO to its lowest possible number, I would have had a very overexposed footage. So in order to have an actual watchable film, I had to sacrifice some of the quality and basically have no motion blur in the film at all. So maybe at first glance you wouldn't be able to see any noise in the footage, but with these flashback scenes you can pretty much see the footage is kind of washed out. It's a bit noisy and grainy. You can see the stark contrast between this scene and this scene. Fortunately, it did kind of work for the scenes themselves, just from a narrative perspective. You can work it into the story and make it your own. But I do wish that I had an ND with me back then. Even if my image goes a tiny bit darker, I can fix that in post, but I can't fix this. Now, grainy footage is sometimes unavoidable and it's okay to have, so it's not, again, the end of the world if you have some noise in your footage. And this is actually a good mental note to have, and I will repeat this a couple of times during this video. Your footage doesn't look the same between your phone and what you have after that in your editing software. That footage that you think looks way too dark on your phone is not going to look the same on your editing software. Anytime you feel that your image is way too dark and you need to like adjust ISO a little bit to just have it a little bit brighter, just compensate maybe some of the image quality, don't do it. Just stick with a lower ISO and you'll be able to adjust your footage in post. So if you film in dark places with little to no light, you still get some noise in your footage. That's kind of unavoidable. No matter how low you set ISO, you'll still be able to see just a little bit of grain here and there, especially like in the darker areas. The ND that I'm currently using is the Hoya ND8, and an ND8 is not as strong enough, so I combine it with the CPL that's within this kit. These are actually pretty decent filters. You can find the link to the Hoya video down in the description below. It's more extensive and it shows what the Hoya is capable of. You'll be able to see the ND work independently, the ND with the CPL, just the CPL alone, and also the UV filter, which I've turned into a mist filter because I don't need the UV otherwise. I also have a blog post going extensively over what the Hoya can do, so if you're more of a reading person, the blog post is going to be in the description below. Talking about ND filters kind of brings me to mistake number 3, not using the 5-in-1 reflector. This bad boy. So this isn't a mistake in itself. You can either use or not use your gear, it doesn't matter. So it's not like a necessity to have one of these or to use them. But I do have it and I don't use it as much as I want to. I have used the 5-in-1 reflector, especially the negative fill for this mobile commercial. This is the cereal commercial. On the right here is a big window, so there was quite a lot of light coming into like the room. So I had to set up the negative fill just to be able to flag this side of the footage. Let's see. There you go. You can see you can easily mount this onto a tripod. Usually you would use a C-stand, but this is something again quite expensive. You can use the monopod to create a sort of a C-stand yourself. You can kind of see it here in this photo how the monopod with the reflector attached looks like. I think I initially planned to use gaff tape to just secure the reflector onto the monopod, but in the end I decided to go with these clamps. Now I did try to use the 5-in-1 reflector for the letter, and I knew that I don't have an ND filter, so this was my solution for some of those scenes in the beginning, especially in the field where there's absolutely no shadow anywhere. There was a strong wind then, so even if I tried to hold it just above my head, just to block the sun that was behind me, so it wouldn't shine in Nikki's face, it didn't actually work as planned. So if you watch this scene here, you'll be able to see this odd shadow on Nikki's face, just you know, bouncing in and out, just slowly swaying. And that's me trying to hold the reflector above my head and not being able to keep it still. At this point, I just decided to not use it anymore. You will need maybe like a third person to be able to hold this, be it just on its own, because it has like nice and comfy handles, or with the combination with the monopod. Talking about light brings me to mistake number 4, and that is no lights. Lighting a scene is an art form in itself. That's why it's called painting with light. It takes quite a lot of practice. It takes quite a lot of reading and learning and watching. And I'm not an expert here at all. I'm learning how to work with lights and I'm experimenting with those. But still, I do film mostly outside, so I do rely quite a lot on natural light. I think I mentioned before, for clouds, the only reasonable way to film this was during the golden hour. The golden hour helped quite a lot with the exterior scenes, but when it came to those scenes, and there are quite a lot of those filmed inside the car, that's when things start to change a little bit. You can have a bit of a leeway with the ISO, just don't go above 100. Like you can see here on the side, it's kind of noisy. You can see this graininess coming into it, especially here on the darker portions of the shot. If you use KineMaster like I do, you won't be able to clean artifacts as easily as you think. You'll be able to adjust the highlights, the brightness, the shadows, but that's not gonna be enough to salvage your footage. But here at the very end, the noise is like impossible. It's just kind of barely watchable on some devices. I know that. We did the same thing with Peekaboo. This is like the very short Halloween teaser. I touched ISO a little bit. I pushed it higher just a little bit, but the image is grainy and there's a lot of artifacts. Now I'm gonna repeat myself, but I think this is a solid advice. Don't be tempted to push ISO higher just to be able to see what's happening on screen. Frame your shot, take it, and then when you transfer your footage onto your editing software, you'll be able to see how much brighter it is than you initially thought. And this, last but not least, brings us to mistake number 5. Not knowing your gear. Not knowing your gear can be a very stressful situation, not only for you, but also I think for the people that you film with. And maybe you film with friends, I do, but again, I don't want them to feel like they're, you know, waiting for me to figure out gear that I should have known how to use before I came and before we actually started filming. Don't get me wrong, obviously you will need some time before you start filming to set up Filmic Pro, for instance, or to, you know, set up your gimbal. Like normal thing, this is like within the process itself. And this is actually a reference to the delivery in the running scene with the monopod and the gimbal. It wasn't me just being overconfident that I know how to use my gear. It was me being impatient. And this, I think, is one of my prime mistakes in general in this like mobile filmmaking journey. And I am working on this. I try to be more patient with the way I do things and to try to take more time to just get comfortable with the gear that I'm using, just to be able to understand it a little bit better. Mistakes are okay, don't get me wrong. Growing as a content creator in the mobile filmmaking world means learning constantly and experimenting. I think that's the fun part of it. In order to learn how to use any of the gear you have, and I mean like lights, mics, gimbals, you just have to spend some time with them and have fun with them. Alright, these were my 5 mistakes as a mobile filmmaker. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the video and maybe found something useful to help you along the way. Hit subscribe to be notified when another video comes out. And if you've liked this one, leave a like, leave a comment, and till next time.